Every Halloween, my friends and I made a ritual of visiting the old Hawthorne mansion on the edge of town. It was a dilapidated, Gothic structure, renowned for its eerie history and the rumors that it was haunted. This year, however, we were feeling especially daring. We'd heard tales of a hidden room in the mansion, one that had never been found. On Halloween night, we arrived at the mansion under a pale crescent moon. The house stood imposingly against the dark sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes. We entered through a side door that had been forced open many years ago, our flashlights casting long, jittery shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. Our footsteps echoed as we wandered through the decaying rooms. The mansion seemed to whisper secrets, its groans and creaks amplified by our imagination. Every now and then, we'd hear a faint scraping sound, but we brushed it off as the wind or settling would. Our group consisted of four: Mark, Sarah, Emily, and me. We each had a different reason for being there. Mark was a thrill seeker, always craving the next scare. Sarah was a history buff, eager to uncover hidden stories. Emily had a keen interest in the paranormal, and I was the skeptic, dragged along by my friends. We made our way to the basement, where the air was colder and the darkness seemed to press in on us. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, broken toys, and cobwebs. We noticed a narrow, dusty staircase leading further down, barely visible in the dim light. "Let's check it out," Emily suggested, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Mark and Sarah agreed, and despite my reservations, I followed. The staircase ended in a small, dark room. It was empty except for an old chest in the corner. Our flashlights barely illuminated it, but it seemed oddly out of place. The chest was ornate, covered in intricate carvings, and its lock was old and rusted. Mark's curiosity got the better of him, and he began prying at the chest with a crowbar he'd brought. It took some effort, but eventually, the lid creaked open. Inside, we found stacks of old letters and a few dusty books. Nothing particularly horrifying, but the letters were intriguing. They were written in a shaky hand, dated back to the early 1900s, and spoke of a hidden room in the mansion where something unspeakable was kept. As we read, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. We shivered, exchanging uneasy glances. Mark tried to lighten the mood by joking about the ghost of the mansion's former owner, but none of us were really in the mood for laughter. A sudden, loud bang echoed from upstairs, causing us all to jump. The house seemed to come alive with creaks and groans. We debated leaving, but curiosity kept us anchored. We decided to investigate the noise. We climbed back up to the main floor, but everything appeared as it had before. The noises had stopped, leaving us in an unsettling silence. We searched the rooms but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed something odd, a faint light coming from the second-floor hallway. We followed it, our flashlights flickering and casting erratic shadows. The light led us to a door we hadn't noticed before, tucked away behind a heavy curtain. The door was slightly ajar, and the light spilled into the hallway. Inside, we found an elaborate room, untouched by time. It was beautifully furnished, with a grand mirror and a fireplace, as if it had been frozen in the early 1900s. The room had an almost palpable sense of serenity, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. As we explored, the temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted. It was as if the room had been waiting for us. We examined every corner, finding nothing alarming, just an unexpected glimpse into a bygone era. When we finally left, the moon was high, and the mansion seemed to sigh in relief. We never found the hidden room the letter spoke of, but that night, we experienced something truly strange. The old Hawthorne mansion was not merely a haunted house. It was a place where time and reality seemed to twist and blend. To this day, we remember that night with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The mansion stands empty now, and though we never returned, the memory of that hidden room and the light that led us there lingers in our minds, a reminder of the strange and unexplained. Last Halloween, I went to a party in an old Victorian mansion that had been converted into a haunted house attraction. The place had been abandoned for years before someone decided it would make the perfect venue for a Halloween bash. I had heard whispers of its history, stories about the original owners who mysteriously disappeared in the 1920s. The whole thing was just supposed to be for fun, but there was something undeniably eerie about the place. When I arrived, the mansion was already in full swing. The front yard was cluttered with fake tombstones and cobwebs, and guests in various costumes milled about, exchanging nervous laughter and half-hearted screams. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burnt candle wax and cinnamon. The walls were lined with cobwebs, and dim, flickering lights barely pierced the gloom. The decorations were impressive old-fashioned lanterns, Victorian furniture covered in dust, and creaky floorboards that seemed to sigh underfoot. I was with a group of friends, and we decided to explore the mansion together. We made our way through a series of dimly lit rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The mansion's layout was bizarre. Rooms seemed to lead into other rooms in ways that didn't quite make sense, and we often found ourselves retracing our steps. At the heart of the mansion was a grand staircase that led up to the second floor. As we ascended, the temperature seemed to drop noticeably, and the air grew colder. We reached the second floor and found ourselves in a long, narrow hallway. The walls here were adorned with old portraits of the mansion's former residents. Their eyes seemed to follow us as we walked, and I had to fight the urge to look away. The hall ended at a heavy wooden door. A faded sign next to it read "The Master Bedroom." My friends, ever eager for a thrill, urged me to open it. I hesitated but eventually relented. As soon as I pushed the door open, an old, musty smell wafted out. The room inside was large, with a four-poster bed draped in tattered, moth-eaten fabric. The furniture was heavy and ornate, and an old grandfather clock stood silently in the corner. We stepped inside, and I immediately felt a strange, uneasy sensation. The room felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something. My friends spread out, exploring the corners and examining the old trinkets scattered around. I was drawn to a large mirror on one wall, its surface foggy and tarnished. As I stared at my reflection, I noticed something odd, a shadow moving behind me in the mirror. I spun around, but the room was empty. My friends were still scattered around, laughing and chatting, oblivious to my growing unease. I returned to the mirror and saw the shadow again, but this time it was clearer. It looked like a figure standing just outside the room. My heart raced. I told my friends about what I had seen, but they dismissed it as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. Still, they agreed to leave the room and continue exploring. As we exited, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. We moved on to another part of the mansion, but the oppressive atmosphere of the master bedroom lingered. We found ourselves in a small, cluttered study. Dust-covered books lined the shelves, and an old desk in the center was strewn with yellowed papers. As we examined the papers, we heard a noise, a faint, distant thud coming from the direction of the master bedroom. It was then that we realized we were not alone. We heard footsteps echoing through the hallways, although there was no one else around. The sounds grew louder and more regular, as if someone or something was moving quickly through the mansion. We decided to leave, but as we made our way back, the mansion seemed to twist and shift, making it difficult to retrace our steps. Eventually, we found our way back to the front door, and we fled into the night, adrenaline pumping. The mansion's facade loomed behind us, dark and silent. We never spoke of what happened that night again, and I can't help but wonder if we had just experienced a figment of our collective imagination or if there was something truly unsettling within those walls. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that whatever we encountered in that mansion was real. Every Halloween, I think back to that night and the shadowy figure in the mirror, and I can't help but wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next group of thrill seekers to cross its path. It was Halloween night, the kind of night when the world seems to bend at the edges, turning shadows into monsters. My friends and I had gathered at the old Whitmore house, a dilapidated mansion on the edge of town that everyone said was haunted. We had heard the tales of ghostly whispers and flickering lights, but we were more interested in making a video for our YouTube channel than actually encountering anything supernatural. Little did we know, this Halloween would be different. The house was as foreboding as ever. Its once grand facade was now cloaked in darkness, with broken windows and a sagging porch that seemed ready to collapse under the weight of time. We set up our cameras in the front parlor, a room where the floor creaked with every step, and the air was thick with dust. My friend Jack, always the skeptic, was manning the main camera while Sarah and Emily decorated the room with cobwebs and fake spiders. I was checking the audio equipment in the corner, trying to ignore the strange chill that seemed to have settled over the room. The clock struck midnight as we started our live stream, each of us playing up the spooky atmosphere with exaggerated fright and playful banter. The first hour passed without incident, and we were all starting to relax into our roles. That was when the lights flickered, a momentary stutter that we initially brushed off as a malfunction. Jack laughed it off. "Typical haunted house stuff," he said, his voice echoing a bit too loudly in the stillness. But as the night wore on, the flickering grew more persistent, until the lights seemed to dance on and off, casting eerie shadows across the walls. It was around 1 a.m. when things took a turn. Sarah, who had been sitting by the fireplace, suddenly stood up with a startled expression. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all froze, listening intently. There was a faint sound, like the scraping of nails against wood, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Emily, ever the brave one, suggested we investigate. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, we made our way down the darkened hallway toward the source of the sound. The hallway was lined with old portraits whose eyes seemed to follow us as we walked. The air grew colder with each step, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. We reached a door at the end of the hall, partially ajar with an almost imperceptible glow coming from within. Jack pushed the door open, revealing a small, cluttered room filled with old furniture and dusty books. The glow was coming from a single candle on a table, flickering with a strange, rhythmic pattern. It seemed out of place, almost as if someone had deliberately set it there. Emily picked up the candle, examining it closely. "This doesn't make any sense," she said, her brow furrowing. "Who would leave a lit candle in an abandoned house?" Before anyone could respond, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. We jumped, the sound echoing through the room. Sarah scrambled to open the door, but it was as if it was being held shut from the other side. Panic set in. We pounded on the door, calling out for help, but no one answered. The candle's flame flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to come alive on the walls. Just when we were about to lose hope, the door creaked open slowly. We burst out into the hallway, our hearts pounding. We checked the rest of the house, but everything was exactly as we had left it. The lights were still flickering, and the cold was still there, but there was no sign of anyone else. When we finally decided to leave, we packed up our equipment in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We had survived, but the sense of dread lingered long after we left the Whitmore house behind. To this day, we often discuss that night. None of us can explain what happened, but we all agree on one thing: that house was alive in a way that defied logic. The candle, the locked door, the shadows, none of it made sense, but the fear we felt was all too real. Every Halloween since, I find myself thinking about that night, wondering if there was something in the Whitmore house that we barely escaped from, or if it was just our imagination running wild. Either way, I know one thing for sure: I will never set foot in that house again. It was Halloween night, and the air outside was cold, biting through my coat as I trudged up the gravel path to the old Miller house. The place had always been the stuff of local legend, rumored to be haunted, filled with the ghosts of those who vanished without a trace. Despite the tales, a group of us had decided to spend the night there, a sort of Halloween dare we couldn't resist. The house loomed before us, its silhouette a jagged black against the moonlit sky. It was a dilapidated Victorian, its once grand facade now weathered and sagging. The windows, dark and empty, seemed to watch us as we approached. We stepped inside, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. The atmosphere was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. We set up in the large, dusty parlor, where a grand fireplace stood cold and silent. The plan was simple: explore the house, scare ourselves silly, and then leave before dawn. It was all in good fun until the house decided to play its own game. Around midnight, as we sat in a circle telling ghost stories, the lights flickered. I remember the abrupt chill in the air, a stark contrast to the warmth we had brought with us. We laughed it off, attributing it to the old wiring. But then the temperature plummeted further, our breaths visible in the sudden cold. I decided to investigate, breaking away from the group. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I wandered the hallways, each step echoing off the empty walls. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once, a sound that seemed to resonate with an unnatural echo. In the dim light, I noticed something odd: a fresh layer of dust disturbed in front of one of the doors. It was as if someone had recently walked through it, leaving footprints behind. My heart quickened, but I pressed on, driven by curiosity. The door led to a small, cluttered room filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. I was about to turn back when I heard a low, mournful moan coming from somewhere behind me. Spinning around, I aimed my flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. Only silence and the oppressive darkness of the house. Just then, the door slammed shut behind me. I tried to push it open, but it was stuck. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I pounded on the door, calling out to my friends. My voice sounded weak and distant, swallowed by the thick walls of the house. Then, I saw it. A shadow, no, a figure moving across the room. It was as if someone was shifting under the sheets of one of the covered furniture pieces. The figure emerged slowly, a gaunt, ghostly face peeking out from beneath the fabric. I froze, unable to move or scream. The figure came closer, its eyes hollow and its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. I was paralyzed by fear. It reached out a thin, skeletal hand towards me, and I could see the desperation in its empty eyes. I could feel its cold presence drawing nearer, chilling me to the bone. Just as I thought it was going to touch me, I heard a loud bang. The door flew open, and my friends rushed in, their faces pale with fright. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. I stumbled out of the room, my friends pulling me along. We huddled together in the parlor, our nerves frayed. We decided to leave immediately, but as we gathered our things, the atmosphere changed. The house seemed to breathe around us, a living, malevolent entity. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing in the empty halls. When we finally emerged into the crisp night air, the house seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, as if it had been holding its breath. We drove away in silence, our eyes darting back at the house, which now appeared more sinister than ever. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that room. Was it a trick of the mind, or was the Miller house truly alive, harboring something malevolent within its decaying walls? I don't know. What I do know is that we all left that night with a shared sense of dread and the unshakable belief that we had come dangerously close to something we could never truly understand. The Miller house still stands, silent and brooding, and every Halloween, I find myself shivering at the thought of that ghostly figure watching from the shadows. The Halloween party had been a blast until it wasn't. Our friends and I had gathered at Marla's old, creaky Victorian house for what was supposed to be the highlight of our college careers. But the night took a turn I can't fully explain. Even now, we were all in costume. I'd gone as a ghost, draped in a bedsheet with holes cut for eyes. The rest of my friends were equally decked out, a witch, a vampire, a zombie. Marla's house was the perfect setting, a house with a dark history that made for great Halloween conversation. After hours of music and laughter, we decided to take a break from the noise and venture into the basement. Marla's basement was notorious among us for being creepy, a fact she proudly emphasized. I wasn't particularly fond of the idea, but the allure of something spooky drew me in. The basement was cold and musty, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. Our laughter and chatter echoed off the stone walls. We dared each other to explore, to poke around in corners that hadn't seen light in decades. That's when things started to feel off. The first sign was the noise. It was faint at first, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. We all froze, eyes wide. "It's probably just the house settling," Marla said, trying to sound nonchalant. But the noise persisted, growing louder, and it wasn't just the house. It was more rhythmic, like a thudding heartbeat. We all turned toward the sound. It was coming from behind an old wooden door that was slightly ajar. It was the kind of door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. We hesitated, but curiosity got the better of us. Marla, with a mix of bravado and anxiety, nudged the door open. The room beyond was dark, lit only by the occasional flicker of a faulty light bulb. As we stepped inside, the room's temperature dropped noticeably. The walls were lined with ancient shelves filled with dusty jars and cobwebs. The center of the room was dominated by an old-fashioned rocking chair, which began to rock slowly back and forth on its own. Panic gripped us, but we couldn't bring ourselves to leave. The chair's rocking grew faster, and the thudding noise intensified. Then we noticed something that made our blood run cold, a handprint on the dusty floor, smudged as if someone had tried to crawl across it recently. The rocking chair suddenly stopped, and we heard a guttural groan, a sound so inhuman it didn't seem to come from anywhere. We were all frozen, holding our breath. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Then, from the corner of the room, a shape began to materialize, a shadowy figure that seemed to writhe and contort. It was tall, indistinct, but its presence was overwhelmingly malevolent. We all stood, paralyzed, while the figure seemed to grow closer, the space between us and its shrinking dot as it approached. The temperature dropped even further. I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of me. The figure's groaning grew louder, more desperate. It was clear that whatever was there was struggling, maybe even suffering. Just as it seemed like we would be enveloped in darkness, Marla screamed and bolted for the door, and we followed in a chaotic rush. We stumbled back upstairs, our hearts pounding in our chests. We slammed the basement door shut and leaned against it, gasping for air. The rest of the night was a blur of terrified whispers and nervous laughter. We never went back into the basement, and Marla eventually told us that her family had always said the house was haunted, but she never really believed it. We never figured out what that shadowy figure was, or what it wanted. We all agreed it was best left undisturbed. The basement was sealed off, and the rest of the party went on, but none of us could shake the feeling that we had brushed against something truly otherworldly. That night remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. Every Halloween, when the air turns crisp and the shadows lengthen, I can't help but remember the thudding heartbeat and the shadow that seemed to reach out for us from the dark corners of Marla's basement. It was Halloween night, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. I was with my friends Mark, Jenna, and Sarah, out in the woods behind my house. We'd been told the place was haunted, old local legends about a witch who vanished without a trace. But we were skeptics. The moon was a thin crescent, barely shedding light through the dense forest canopy. We had planned to make a fun night of it, ghost stories, s'mores, and a few harmless scares. What happened was something none of us could have anticipated. We set up our little campfire in a small clearing. As the flames crackled, Jenna began her tale of the witch. According to the story, she'd been a healer who had helped many but had turned to dark practices after a tragedy. People said she'd cursed the land before she disappeared, and every Halloween, her restless spirit would wander the woods. Mark, always the joker, dared us to split up and meet back at the clearing. I wasn't keen on the idea but didn't want to be the coward. So, we each took a different path. I wandered deeper into the forest, my flashlight bobbing in the dark. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. I stopped near a large oak tree to listen. That's when I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was faint, almost like a heartbeat. I scanned the darkness, trying to find the source. Then, I saw it, a figure, barely visible between the trees. It was slender and seemed to be moving slowly toward me. I was about to call out to my friends when I realized the figure wasn't moving, rather. It was swaying side to side. My breath quickened. I moved back toward the clearing, but as I did, the tapping grew louder. It was as if someone was following me, matching my pace. I turned frequently, but the figure was always just out of sight. When I finally reached the clearing, my friends were already there. I could see the relief in their eyes as I approached. I relayed my experience, and Sarah suggested we should stick together from then on. The air was thick with tension, but we tried to laugh it off. We gathered closer around the fire, attempting to put on brave faces. Then, Jenna suggested a game to lift our spirits. We played a version of Truth or Dare, but with a Halloween twist. Dare after dare, we ventured deeper into the forest. The game started to lose its fun, though, as the atmosphere grew heavier, Jenna dared Mark to walk to the old, abandoned cabin about a quarter-mile away. The cabin had been deserted for years and was part of the legend about the witch's last known location. Mark, always up for a challenge, agreed. He set off with his flashlight and a sense of bravado. Sarah and I waited anxiously at the clearing, while Jenna sat quietly, her face pale. Minutes passed, and Mark still hadn't returned. My unease grew. Jenna was now clutching her arms, her face etched with worry. Just as I was about to suggest going to look for him, Mark emerged from the trees, breathless and wide-eyed. He claimed to have seen something, a shadow with no source of light, moving behind him in the cabin. He swore he heard whispers and saw something dart past the window. Even though the cabin was supposed to be empty, we were on edge but decided to stick it out. We gathered closer around the fire, trying to shake off the creeping fear. The night wore on, and we shared more stories, though the atmosphere remained heavy. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we packed up our things and headed back to the house. We were all relieved to be leaving, but the night's events left us with an unsettling feeling. As we parted ways, Mark revealed that he had noticed a strange symbol scratched into a tree near the cabin, something that looked like an old rune. The kind of thing you'd expect in horror movies. The woods behind my house remained silent for years after that Halloween. We never ventured into them again. To this day, we talk about that night with a mix of disbelief and dread. None of us experienced anything explicitly harmful, but the eerie feeling of being watched and the strange occurrences made that Halloween night unforgettable.